I remember growing up, my mom and dad and I would all gather around in the family room, and we had this gigantic oak piece of furniture, and it weighed like 500 pounds, and it was our TV. You guys remember that? And we would watch these shows together, and these were like the old school TV shows. And you know what I loved about the old school TV shows is the theme songs. Because it's almost back then when they would commission the songwriter, they would say, okay, what you need to do is you need to take 30 seconds and introduce us to all the characters, and take that 30 seconds and tell us what this show is all about. So I want you just to go back, kind of old school a little bit today, and see if you remember any of these old school TV theme shows. Hit it, Carlos.
Here's a story of a lovely lady who was bringing up three very lovely girls. All of them had hair of gold, like their mother, the youngest one in curls.
All right. How many remember that show, The Brady Bunch? Yeah, that's what I thought. We're going old school, okay? Here we go. Hey, you know, the whole show is like all right there in the theme song, okay? That's a tough thing to do. Okay, here we go. You guys remember this one? Hit it, Carlos.
Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip.
If you know it, feel free to sing along.
From this tropic port
But you will show your age.
The mate was a mighty sailor, and the skipper brave and sure. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour.
All right. That's good. That's hard to do, okay? I mean, to put the whole show in a little 30-second little jingle. All right, how about this one? You guys remember this one? Here's another one right here. Here we go.
Well, we're moving on now to the deluxe apartments in the sky. Moving on up to the sky.
All right, moving on up, all right? You guys remember that one? Okay, now here's another one. You guys ready? Here we go. We're going back. Now, this one, just through the music, you kind of just know what it's about.
Whatever happened to predictability? The milkman, the paperboy, evening TV. Did I get delivered here? Somebody tell me, please.
How many of you grew up watching Full House? Let me see your hands right here. All right, I got another one. You ready? Here we go. Here's the next one.
It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. And love and tradition of the grand design, some people say, is even harder to find.
All right, I'm taking you back. Now, I'm about to show you my all-time favorite TV show theme song. In 30 seconds, you know what the whole song or what the whole show is all about. You ready? If you know this one, feel free to sing along. Here we go. Hit it. How many of you know the whole thing? Yeah.
Now this is a story
All about how my life got twisted upside down.
And I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. I'll tell you how I became the prince of a town called Bel Air.
All right, that's good. You know, in all of these different shows, you have the whole entire lyrics that are all right there, and it takes us back. Let me ask you this question. If someone were to write a theme song about your life, if they were just put in a short little chunk, what would your theme song be? Maybe for some of you, it might be Survivor by Destiny's Child. Maybe some of your theme song might be Working for the Weekend by Loverboy. Some of you, your theme song may be Living La Vida Loca by Ricky Martin. Or maybe for some of you, your theme song might be This Is Me by The Greatest Showman. We're in this series right now called Lyrics. And in this series, what we're doing is we're looking at some original Crosspoint songs that have been written by our very own worship team. And our desire is that these songs will become your prayers, that they will become the cries of your heart. And you can be able to get these songs, you can be able to listen to them, and they become your anthem, man, the soundtrack for your life. And today's song that we're going to sing today is written by our very own Eddie Harrison. And this is a song called Greatness. It's called Greatness. And this is a song that helps us understand the greatness of God. Now, how do you define greatness? For some of you, you may define greatness through titles, or maybe through promotions, or through a corner office, or maybe for some of you, it's how much money's in your bank account, that defines greatness for some of you. Some of you may define greatness when it comes to relationships, maybe your family, or romance, or friendships. There's so many different ways that you and I define greatness in our life. Maybe for some of you, it's experiences, it's adventure, it's travel. Maybe for some of you, you define greatness as just a drama-free life. Having enough money just to be able to make it through. You don't need a lot. You just need enough to be able to make it through, and you just to be able to have enough certainty. You know, I remember being a little kid, and as a little kid in the neighborhood, there was these two kids named Ronnie and Tony Young. And I remember we would always debate back and forth over whose dad was the best. And we would have this debate, you know, and I'd say, my dad's stronger than your dad. My dad can beat your dad up. And I'd say, my dad is huge. He's so big. And I would put my hands out as if to gain additional stature. And I'd say, my dad, he's big. He's huge. He's enormous. Now, that's not a scientific answer. You wouldn't use that in every context. You know, if your wife or your girlfriend were to walk in and say, hey, how big do my hips look? You wouldn't want to put your hands out wide and say, they're huge, they're big, they're enormous. But I have another question for you today. The question is this: how big is your Heavenly Father? How big is God? How big is your God? How big is Christ in your life? Because I believe a consequence of the size of your God, it determines how big your God is. I believe that if you look at your life and you see how you experience and how you feel life, it depends upon how big your God is. And if you're struggling in life, man, if things are going difficult, man, today my challenge to you is that you will understand the greatness of God. That you will understand how big He is and how great He is. Because for some of you watching today, for some of you that are here today, your God's a little itty-bitty, eeny-weeny, bite-sized God. And today I hope you'll get a glimpse into the greatness of our God. You know, today we're looking at 4 truths about greatness. 4 things, and these truths come directly from the lyrics that Eddie wrote. Truth number 1 is this. He says, for I know He has plans for me. They're purposeful and they're prospering. That God has a purpose and God has a plan for your life. And these lyrics are actually taken from Jeremiah. And Jeremiah chapter 29 and verse 11, it says, for I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you, not to harm you. Plans to give you a what, church? A hope and a future. And you have to understand the context when this was written. This was written whenever God's people Israel was actually ripped out of their homes, and they were actually taken out of Israel, and they were held in captivity in Babylon. And here they are at a place whenever they're in the valley of their life. And Jeremiah the prophet, he looks at him and he tells them, listen, God has not forsaken you. God, He has a plan for you. He has a purpose for you. You won't always be in exile. He wants to prosper you. He wants to give you a future. He wants to give you a hope. God is in control. Maybe you find yourself today in a valley. May you be encouraged today knowing that God is great and that He has a plan for your life, and that He has a purpose for your life, that He wants to see you prosper. You know, one day, Jesus was talking to His disciples, and He asked His disciples, He said, who do people say that I am? And one of the disciples said, well, some people say you're John the Baptist. Other people say you're like the prophet Elijah. Another one spoke up and said, people are saying you're a lot like Jeremiah, the guy who said, I have a plan for you. I have a purpose for you. I want you to be prosperous. Some people are saying you're like Jeremiah. And then Jesus, he looks at his disciples and he says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter looks back and he says, you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus looks at him and gives him an attaboy, by this definitive statement that he is the Christ. He understands the greatness of who God is. And then Jesus goes on, and in that same conversation, he tells Peter, he says, listen, he tells the rest of the disciples, I'm going to suffer, and you're going to suffer, and I'm going to be crucified. And Peter says, no, not on my watch. That's not going to happen. I don't want you to go to the cross. It's not going to happen. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. And Jesus gets ticked off at Peter, and he says, listen, get behind me, Satan. Can you imagine Jesus telling you, get behind me, and calling you Satan? That's what Jesus did to Peter that day. He says, get behind me, Satan. And it was this dramatic event. And then Jesus goes on in Matthew chapter 16. We're looking at Matthew 16, Matthew 17 today in verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples in that context, he said, if you want to be my follower, you have to give up your own way. You have to take up your cross and follow me. That means you may go through a period of a valley in your life. You may feel like you're being crucified. Paul said, I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ who is in me. And he says, if you try to hang on to your life, the things that are involved in this world, the things that you think are so great, he says, you're going to lose your life. But if you give up your life for my sake, you'll save it. That you can experience the greatness of God. And here's the second thing about God's greatness is that he's higher, he's holy, and nothing can compare. This is the second truth about greatness. He is higher, he is holy, and nothing can compare. I want to skip to the slide, Carlos, to Matthew chapter 17. It's going to be a few slides down. Matthew chapter 17 and verse 1. And just to give you a little of the context, is after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and he led them up to a high mountain by themselves. Now, real quick, before we go on to verse 2, this is interesting because Jesus, he has all 12 of his disciples, and he picks 3 of them to go with him up onto this mountain. And Jesus did this often. It's almost like he had these favorites. He would say, okay, Pete, Jim, John, you guys come with me. Pete, Jim, John, you guys, the rest of you disciples, stay here. The rest of you guys. And I'm sure Nate is looking at Bart saying, this is not fair. This isn't right. How come it's always Pete, Jim, John, Pete, Jim, John, Pete, Jim, John? And Jesus did it over and over. Remember one time he healed like the little girl, okay? And it's like, Pete, Jim, John, you come. No, Phil, no, you stay. Pete, Jim, John only, come on. They go into the house. And I'm sure Matt is looking at Phil saying, I hate it when Jesus does this. Can't stand it when Jesus does this. And Phil says, Matt, I don't care whenever they leave. I just can't stand it when they come back. Because you won't believe what happened. I mean, man, this girl was raised to life right there in front of us. Man, wish you guys could have been there. It was so awesome. Jesus, for some reason, Pete, Jim, John. Maybe he had favorites. Maybe they needed special attention. I don't know. And he says, Pete, Jim, John, come with me. And so they go climbing up this mountain. This is called the Mount of Transfiguration. Something really cool happens at the Mount of Transfiguration. Look at verse 2. It says, there Jesus was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. Jesus, his clothes became as white as the light. Now this is interesting because he's showing his glory here. You're getting a glimpse into the greatness of who God is. Now, as I was thinking about this, I thought, man, can you imagine all of a sudden Jesus' face is shining like the sun? And you might think that that's the real miracle here. But you know what I believe the real miracle is? The real miracle is not that his face is shining. It's that his face isn't shining all the time. See, here's the miracle. It's the temporary ceasing of this habitual miracle, that his face isn't shining. See, because when Jesus came to this earth, he was God, but he put on human flesh. He came in the form of a servant. Matthew 20:28 says he didn't come to serve, but to give his life as a ransom for many people. You know, for some of you, myself, I love leadership. I love reading books about leadership. I love talking about leadership. But you know, recently I did a little study in the Bible on leadership. Did you know the word leadership is only used 3 times in the Bible? 3 times the word leadership is used. But you know the word servant is used 163 times? God is more interested in us being servants than us even being leaders and lording that over other people. It says the next thing that happened there, it says in verse 3, Carlos, it says that Moses and Elijah were there. It says, just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Now, this is significant because they're on a mountain. Moses comes down, Elijah, and say, why Moses? Why Elijah? We got to think about the significance of Moses. Moses, he actually wrote, it's called the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Most of those were written by Moses. He wrote out the entire law was written by Moses. And then Elijah was one of the great prophets. As you look at the Old Testament, it's divided from the law, the books of the law, and then it goes into the books of the prophets. And it's like, okay, you've heard this phrase maybe in the Old Testament and New Testament as you read through it. It says, and you hang all this on the law and the prophets. If you were going to do a fantasy draft of who should represent in the Bible the law and the prophets, the number 1 picks, you're going to pick Moses and you're going to pick Elijah. And here they are at the Mount of Transfiguration. And when they're on the top of the mountain there, and it's Jesus and Peter, James and John and Moses and Elijah, Moses and Elijah and Jesus start having a conversation. Now, we don't read about it in Matthew chapter 17 here, but if you go over to the book of Luke, Luke describes what's happening and what's being said in this conversation. And Luke says that Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are talking about Jesus' exodus from this earth. Now, exodus is a very interesting word that they're using here because Moses would understand what exodus is all about. I mean, Moses, he led the exodus of Israel away from Egypt. 2.4 million people were led out of bondage in Egypt. He would understand what the exodus is about. But this is a new kind of exodus. What Moses and Elijah were speaking to Jesus about was the exodus of Jesus through his death, through his crucifixion, through his resurrection, and through his ascension. And much like Moses, because of this exodus, you and I, we get to be free from our sins, free from the bondage of sin, all because of this exodus of what they were talking about up on the top of the Mount of Transfiguration. Well, while they're in the middle of this exodus conversation, Peter, he can't help himself. Peter's the kind of guy who just says what's on his mind. Can anybody relate with that? He's an outward processor, not an inward processor. If he's feeling it, he just blurts it out. So they're talking about Exodus, and Peter just says, this is so good that we're here right now. This is awesome. We're here on the top of the mountain. He's like, listen, here's what we got to do. We got to build some tents. We're going to build tents, and we're going camping, and we're staying up here, and we're never leaving. So we're going to build 3 tents, he says. We're going to build one for Moses. You get a tent, Moses. One for Elijah. Yep, Elijah, you get one. And of course, Jesus gets a tent. It's going to be the biggest one, okay? And we're going to have these 3 tents, and we're going to stay up here on the top of the mountain. Listen, I'm tired of Jesus talking about this crucifixion stuff. This is so much better. Look at him. He's shining. He's shining. We got to stay up here on the top of the mountain. This is awesome. And forget the Exodus talk. We don't need the crucifixion, resurrection. We don't need all that. Let's just stay up here. This is awesome. And I'm sure Moses and Elijah are like, Jesus, who's this guy? Who's this? But have you ever felt like that? You ever felt like you just want to escape? You ever felt like you just want to withdraw? You know, as the world gets darker and as there's more challenges in life, you ever just want to like pull back? Be like, man, wouldn't it be great if we could just like have our own little Christian city? You know, where it's the mayor is a Christian and the Senate is Christians and the judges, they're Christians. And, you know, all the people are Christians and it's awesome. Everybody's face just shines. There's no problems, there's no challenges. Anybody want to withdraw to a place like that? There's only one problem with that. You and me would be there. And we'd screw it all up. We'd totally mess it all up. And God hasn't called us to live in these isolated Christian cities because we're on a mission. And the mission is to help other people find and follow Jesus. Now, one of these days, we have heaven to look forward to, and it's going to be this perfect place with no sin, no suffering, no shame, and it's going to be amazing, and we can look forward to that promise, but for right now, we live in the real world. And Peter's up there saying, let's never leave. Let's stay here on the mountain. But they say, no. We can't stay up here on the mountain. That's stupid talk. Do you ever say anything stupid? And like right when the word comes out of your mouth, you wish you could just grab it, put it back in. That's kind of what Peter did here. He was just talking dumb, saying, no, we don't ever want to leave. Let's just stay here. Let's build tents. And I remember saying something so stupid one time. Oh, it's horrible. One of the most horrible things that I ever said to Shannon. We just got married. It was on our wedding day. It's bad. It's on our wedding day. We're actually, driving to the airport to get on a plane to go to Montego Bay to be able to go for our honeymoon. And I mean, we were so excited. We were going to Sandals Resort. I mean, this is going to be amazing, right? But like right after, we're driving there. We have like this 2-hour drive, and I'm thinking in my head like about everything that had kind of accomplished in my life. And I've been blessed up at that point. I was the first one to ever graduate from college on either side of my family. And when I graduated, all my family was there. I was the first one to ever do that. I come from a very poor background. And then I remember I set some goals before I went to college, and I got to play on a basketball team, and I set some records in college. And my freshman year, I have video of me saying, I want to set this record, I want to do this and this. And guess what? I was able to accomplish those things. And I remember the first time I laid eyes on Shannon, we were actually at a church service, and I was like, man, that's the one. God, you're working in my heart. That's the one right there. And guess what? I was able to marry her. And I remember I was driving down the road, and I was going through I was 22 years old. I was going through, the last 22 years of my life. And I looked at Shannon and was like, all these things that I wanted to accomplish, man, like I was able to accomplish them. And now I feel like my life's over. I did. It's horrible. There's a proverb that says, it's better to be silent and thought a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubts. That's kind of what Peter did. And here's the greatness truth number 3, is that he gives rest to the fatherless, hope for the widow, and he repairs what's broken. So here's why that was stupid what Peter said up on the mountain. Like, we got to stay up here forever, because Jesus said we've got a mission to do. We got to help other people find and follow Jesus, and we can't do it while we're up here on top of the mountain. We got to come down the mountain. So they come down the mountain, and sure enough, when they get to the bottom of the mountain, they find this father and they find this son that's in need. It's on a passage of scripture there. Let me find it, Carlos. It's in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 14. Matthew 17, it says, at the foot of the mountain, right when they get down, a large crowd was waiting for them. And a man came and he knelt before Jesus and he said, Lord, have mercy on my son. How many of you have ever had a sick child before? A child that was in pain. I've heard it said a mother can only be as happy as her least happy child. And here's this son with seizures and suffers terribly. He falls into the fire or into the water because of his seizures and his physical suffering that he's going about. And right, what happened here, I'm gonna give you a little bit, I'm not gonna read verse 16 and 17, but here's basically what happens. The disciples can do nothing about it. What's interesting about this is that Jesus says, well, why don't the disciples help you? Like, well, why don't the disciples do something about this? And at one moment, it's like, but you got Peter, James, and John. They couldn't do anything about it. Isn't it interesting how you can be on this mountaintop experience and like nothing's better and it's awesome and you're like experiencing Jesus, and then this fast, I mean, within just a few moments, I mean, this is within 24 hours, they see Jesus in all of his glory. It's like unbelievable. And then all of a sudden they come down the mountain and it's like they don't have enough faith, like this fast. Like you can come to church and things are amazing, and then you get in a car and you start yelling at your husband. You start yelling at your wife. You get angry. And one moment you're singing these praise songs, and the next moment you're slandering somebody and gossiping about somebody. We're no different than the disciples. It's like one moment they're on this spiritual high, and the next moment they're down in this dark valley, this fast. And the disciples, they said, geez, why couldn't we do something about this boy? And he says, because you lack faith. Verse 18, Jesus, he rebuked the demon in the boy, and it left him. And from that moment, the boy was well. He gives rest to the fatherless, hope for the widow. He repairs what is broken. And like the disciples, you and I, we can be on the mountain one moment and in the valley the next. And Jesus said, you need more faith. You know, sometimes God brings these faith-stretching experiences into our life to grow us. Can I be transparent right now? I have 4 things right now. They're all completely different. But I have 4 things that are things that I'm wrestling with, that I'm struggling with, that I don't have any answers to on all 4 of them. And they're all completely different. They're not even linked up. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to pass this. I really don't know how we're going to pass this. I have 0 answers for this, and I have no clue on this one. And I find myself right now in this like faith-stretching moment of my life. And I was reading yesterday in Psalm chapter 60, and David, he just cried out to God. He said, you know what, human effort is useless, is what he says in Psalm 60. That's what I feel about my 4 things right now. Any human effort I have, I can't control it. It's useless. You ever feel like that in your own life? What do you do in those moments? Here's what I got to do. I got to trust God. I've got to exercise my faith. And I have to say, God, I give this completely to you. And I push pray. P-U-S-H. Push pray. I pray until something happens. I just keep praying until something happens. I heard the story about this small town. In this small town, they didn't have a liquor store. They didn't have a nightclub. They didn't have any bars. And the people in this small town, they liked it that way. And then one day, this new guy came to town. He opened up a nightclub. Well, the church members got upset about it, and they were like, man, we got to do something about this. So they decided, you know what? We're going to pray, and we're going to do these all-night prayer meetings, and we're just going to let God deal with it. And then one night, lightning bolts struck the nightclub, and it burned to the ground. Well, the owner of the nightclub found out about it, and he was ticked off. He said, how dare those Christians? So he gets an attorney, gets a lawyer, and he takes him to court. And while they're in court, the Christians are like, we didn't do anything. Wasn't our fault. Listen, we don't, that wasn't us. You can't put this on us. And after much deliberation, the judge said, here's the opinion of the court, wherever the guilt may lie. We have a case here of a nightclub owner that really believes in the power of prayer and church members that don't. I believe in the power of prayer. And here's the fourth greatness truth, is that Jesus, number 4, Carlos on the screen, he lived a perfect life. Jesus took his last breath and he died. And for us, he sacrificed greatness. See, Satan always works before and after great victories in your life. Remember when Jesus was baptized, after he was baptized, this great high moment, this is awesome, amazing. And remember what happened next? He went 40 days into the wilderness to be tempted by the enemy. When he lived this perfect life, he took his last breath and he died. It looked like Satan had won. But here's the beauty of this. The grave couldn't even hold his greatness. The grave could not contain his greatness. And maybe you're here today and Satan's working. Maybe it's before or after a great victory today. If you're in the valley today, I want to encourage you, keep moving, keep trusting, keep growing, keep learning. Some of you right now are on the mountaintop, and it's all great. Green lights, blue skies, flowers are growing. Go God. And if you're in the mountaintop experience right now, remember this. James says every good gift and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, that everything you have is a gift coming from God. And if you're on the mountaintop, I celebrate with you, and we say go God, because God is giving you a season of blessing. You're riding the God wave now. Enjoy it. But some of you may be like me right now, and you may be in the valley. And there may be problems all around you, maybe physically, financially, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. You may feel overwhelmed. I want to remind you, God has not abandoned you. Remember his greatness. He's going to get you through this. You're going to be stronger because of this. And this is a season for us to grow in our faith. See, because we got a core value here at Crosspoint of faith. We got it on a screen. And I want to ask you to say it with me right now. Because the Bible says without faith, it's impossible to please God. The core value of faith. Do we got it up there, Carlos? Can we say it together? It goes like this. We are faith-filled, big thinking, bet the farm risk takers. We will never insult God with small thinking and safe living.
He has plans for me, purposeful and prospering, giving hope to the least of these, reaching out for him desperately. He gives rest for the fatherless, hope for the widow, repairing what is broken. Greatness, he is higher, holy. Nothing can compare to the greatness of our God. He righteousness for mine, willing to make it right. In death, the world resigned.